Well, welcome back to Trinity Radio. I am Braxton Hunter, and along with me is Dr.
Jonathan Pritchett.
And this is going to be a very exciting show. We're going to be talking about small church ministry. If that doesn't interest you, then shame on you. This is a subject we've never covered on Trinity Radio. Typically, we do a worldview show, but today we're going to get a little bit more local and a little bit more practical. And enough with the highfalutin philosophy. Today, we're going to be talking about how it is in small church ministry.
Amen.
All right, now today it's a little bit of a different topic. Dr. Jonathan Pritchett and myself are both in the midst of a book project edited by one Sam Schmidt. And it's going to be on the subject of small church ministry. Jonathan has served as pastor of a small church, and so have I when I was 20 years old, probably too young to be a pastor, but there I was. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But here's the thing. Here's the reality of it. Basically, what has happened is you're hearing this podcast several weeks from the time we're recording it. There's a little podcaster hint for you. If you ever want to do a podcast, make sure you get a few in the pipeline so you don't make the mistake that we have made over the past several years.
There's a reason why we're doing it this way, is so that we stay more consistent.
Yeah, and so as of recording this podcast, which I think is maybe the 5th since we started back up, we have just this week we released the second of these of this reboot, so to speak, and what we found was that some people were digging some Jonathan Pritchett, man.
Yeah, they like me better, is what
they were all very careful and cautious, I think, to say
to spare your feelings,
to spare my feelings, and all that. And I was very quick to say, yeah, well, guess what? I picked the topic. I did all the research. I had to just tee Jonathan up. But you know what? Here's the thing. The great thing about having two co-hosts is if you don't like the one, you got the other.
Right.
So, but I'm a little bit crestfallen right now, and for that reason, I decided, you know what, fine. You want Jonathan Pritchett? Have all the Jonathan Pritchett you want. And so this week, I said, Jonathan, you pick a topic. I'm going to let you kind of be the guiding principle here. And so here we are. You want to talk about this? It's a noble topic. It's all yours, man.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because just in the recent days prior to recording this podcast, certain evangelical denominations get ready for their annual meetings and stuff. Specifically, the SBC has a big meeting over the summer, and there was another report that once again baptisms are down, and I noticed some comments were made that churches with fewer than, I think it was around 75 people, is by far the majority of churches in the Southern Baptist Convention. And I always take Adrian Rogers' old statement that the SBC is basically a bellwether for evangelicalism. So I would assume that it's true for a lot of other denominations. I know that we have a General Baptist pastor on staff. He's a bivocational guy, works here full time. And he says the average General Baptist church has 40 to 50 people. And so most churches in America, I think, at least under 200 probably would be a fair assessment. And they were talking about the decline of baptisms, and that a lot of churches reported 2 or less baptisms, at least in the SBC, and that's probably par for the course for most churches of that size, I would say. And so small churches were getting a lot of flack, as if you're in a small church and you baptize 1 or 2 people a year, and that's about it, well, you're not a vibrant, active faith community. And I think that's totally false. A lot of these congregations are more senior-driven congregations, and they have a robust faith life. They have a robust community life within their church. And in rural areas, I know that a lot of times there's not a field to go harvest anymore. They've been vacated, and so many people commute to the larger cities or have moved closer to the larger cities. So I know, just driving through Indiana and places in Arkansas where I came from before I moved here, there are a lot of rural churches out there, and they're doing what they can. And I don't like this idea of writing those churches off. I got my start in rural churches in the ministry, as far as like being a youth pastor, being an outreach pastor. And then when I was a senior pastor, that didn't go so well, but by the end of it, mainly because we started having a vibrant ministry. But I know that those kind of churches are the exceptions; they're not the rule. But I've always had a good experience in small churches. I attend a small church now, and of course, with our church, when you go to a church with Dr. Harold Hunter and Dr. Braxton Hunter and our friend Dylan Simmons, seeing baptism services every month is not unusual at all. I mean, we
well,
have
yeah.
people,
Let's talk a little bit about that,
Yeah.
because that's something that's close on our heart right now. So we'll tell a little bit about our own personal experiences pastoring small churches.
Yeah.
But first, one of the reasons this is on our mind is because my father had a vibrant evangelistic ministry on the road. He started in 1991, and in 2006, he became the president of Trinity Seminary. And then after doing that for a while, he said, you know what, he's in his 70s now. In these years of my life, what I really want to do is I want to pastor again. There's just something in my blood. It's something God has gifted me for. I've got to do that. And he wanted to start a church on Trinity's campus. And so he did. Trinity Village Chapel. And they have their own Facebook page and stuff. And you can actually usually watch, if you become my father's friend, Harold Hunter, on Facebook, you can actually watch some of those sermons and things.
Yeah.
And we'll be blessed by it. But he did that. Now, it grew a bit, but it's still a small church. Now, let me say what is fascinating about this. Though it is a small church, it has seen a number of salvations, a number of, therefore, baptisms,
Yes.
and actually 2 young men in their, one in his 20s and one in his early 30s, surrendered to preach the gospel and have now been ordained and are now preaching the gospel, all in the space of about a year and a half. That happened.
Yeah.
Now, that is phenomenal. And I'll tell you what, I've preached in, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant. I hope you guys know me well enough that you don't think that way about me. It's him that's arrogant, not me.
Right.
But honestly, I've preached in some large places. I've preached in some churches with several thousand. I've preached some area-wide crusades. We call them crusades. Get over it if you don't like the term. With 4,000 to 5,000 people there. And that's all been incredible, and everything. But you'd think that's where I'd be most stressed out. No. Where I'm most stressed out is preaching at Trinity Village Chapel. Because Jonathan Pritchett, for one thing, is sitting in the crowd.
There, Dr. Tom Rogers
Dad's sitting there. Tom
Your dad's
Rogers,
sitting there.
who's an Old Testament scholar and used to be the president of Trinity, he's sitting there.
Albert Elliott.
Everyone in that congregation, just about, except for the visitors, are people who are, really close to God and have been walking with Him, most of them, for a long time.
And really know their Bibles. And
Yeah. So you got to be really cautious what you say. But the point is, it's probably like no evangelist could come to our church if it was just the members there and say, in a crowd of this size, there's bound to be some lost folks here. No, guess what? There's probably not. And so it's
not among the members.
It's intimidating to preach there because this is a demonstration of what a small church can be, which is a preaching station where the lost will be saved, but also a launch pad for other ministries, young men being ordained to preach the gospel, and then deep Bible teaching on a weekly basis for those who are, somewhat further along in discipleship. So there is such a powerful benefit. And as my father always says, there are no small, there may be small churches, but there are no small ministries.
Right.
That ministry is as important in terms of the eyes of God as a megachurch is.
Yeah, I think our current experience at Trinity Village Chapel is a good microcosm of what all could be done. I wouldn't say that, given that most of us are in ministry, our church isn't just overflowing with money in the coffers either.
Right.
Our tithe checks aren't enormous because we work at Trinity, and the people that come to church there, not the wealthiest, most affluent people, I wouldn't say, and yet our church can afford things, nice things, can afford to take everybody on excursions. Like they just went to the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, right?
Yeah.
All paid for by the church.
That may be something we can talk about later if this starts to go south.
Right. But I don't think this will go south, because I hear so often, well, the church in America is this, the church in America is that, the church in America is so biblically illiterate. And every small church that I've ever been to, those people know their Bibles. They may not know much
Well, that's
else.
not my experience, but
that's my experience.
I'm stepping in what you're laying down.
Yeah. It's been my experience. They know their Bibles. They read their Bibles.
Even the church you pastored?
Well, the church I pastored, some of them did. When I was voted out by 6 people versus 5 people. So 5 people knew their Bibles, but we were running about 60 when that happened. But in my experience, people know their Bibles in these small churches. But see, that church is different. We'll get to that experience later. But in just the small churches I've seen, most of the congregations are skew older, and they all, best I can estimate, know their Bibles quite well.
You know what I've noticed, and I've said this before, and there's going to be people take issue with this, but write to us. I mean, there's the number on the screen. Just write to us, or the email address, Trinity Radio at trinitysim.edu. You can write. But, and I mean, I have a trash bin, so, but I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, where there is a deficiency, because I'll agree with you that older folks who have been in the church all their lives, or a lot of their lives, they do know the Bible better in a lot of cases than young folks.
Yes.
But if there is a deficiency with the older folks or the younger folks, here's what I found. See what you think about this. Tell me if I'm wrong. If there's a deficiency, the older people that have this deficiency, they know what they believe, but they don't necessarily know why they believe it, right? Because they've never seen, a lot of them have not seen the reason to be skeptical or whatever that.
Right.
But the young folks who have been raised in this apologetics enriched world now that we're developing, where at least all the resources are on offer, they might know why they believe, but like the class I taught for a while at the church I was serving as an interim at, that we may talk about later, they knew why they believed, but they didn't know what they believed exactly.
Right.
They didn't know what the Bible
and
taught.
They didn't know much of the Bible.
So there is a weird, and I think obviously what the older folks have is probably the more important thing, but they're both important.
Yeah, they're both important, but if I had to pick one, just biblical literacy, I think and in fact, it's no secret that, the common complaint about most churches in America is they skew older and they're mostly women. Women outnumber men too. Women, they know their Bibles. Probably more than the older men do, even, because they read their Bible. I'm always fascinated by that. So when people make stereotypes about the church in America, most churches are churches under 200 people, and yet they say things like, well, they're so biblically illiterate. But they're always pushing that off on what they see going on in larger churches or even mega churches, where they think there's thin sermons and there's thin biblical literacy in those, and those typically skew baby boomers or younger.
It'd be interesting to know, because like I've seen some Lifeway research data and I've seen some Barna research data that, and theoretically they're being cautious about those sorts of different demographics when they do it, but I don't know, and it'd be nice to know.
Yeah. Because I imagine when I've been to a bunch of small rural churches, make sure you see the Trinity on my mug.
Yeah. Whether you're at a small church or not.
Yeah. I hear what's going on from our students, because we have a lot of small church pastors who are students. We also have students here that are pastors of mega churches and all that too, but I would say that the bulk of them are smaller church pastors, 200. And I find out what's going on, and it seems like their churches are doing a lot of things. If they only baptize 3 or 4 people a year, it's not because they lack evangelistic fervor. They have it. It's not because they don't love Jesus enough, or they're not interested in mission, or the term is missional now, I think. So it's not that they're not missional or whatever. I mean, they have their food pantries and they're serving their community best they can. They still have large communities, and they're typically one of 3 or 4 churches in that community, all roughly around the same size. Now, my experience is kind of, Well, I got my start in vocational ministry as an outreach pastor. And I did that for a few years. And that was at a Reformed Baptist church where my buddy was the pastor for many years. And we saw growth. I guess when he got called as pastor there, he brought me and a couple of other people from the church that we were all attending over there with him. And it started out 25 people or so. And it got up to 70 to 75 people within about 6 months. Just inviting people to church, going out into the community, inviting your lost friends, things like that. He was a younger guy when he first started there, so we had younger friends, and we're like, hey, my buddy's pastor, let's all go, give him some support, even if you're not into church or whatever, just do it. Let's just do it for him. Just sit there.
There's
and
an
shut
evangelism
up.
tactic.
Yeah, just sing and shut up, And it was great church. I think at its best on Easter Sunday, you might get up to about 125. But in its area, it was never going to get that big anyway. But you can get it as vibrant as you can given your location. I'm not saying get a young pastor in there. That's not always the answer. But that was what worked for that small church. They got a younger guy in there who could talk to people his own age, and it brought younger families, and they had children's ministry.
That's what everybody wants, right? That's what I've noticed. The trend, used to be when I listened to the old timers talk. It used to be you get a guy in his mid to late 40s, early 50s, who's got some experience on him and all that whole thing. But now the way it goes is he needs to be between 30 and 40 because we want to see that family. We want an attractive man, an attractive wife, and 2 kids, and all that. And obviously there is something that to a newcomer might seem more energetic or more fresh or whatever about that. I don't think that's always the answer, though. It does work sometimes. Yeah. I mean, like when I went to my second church, I was young. I was 23, 24 years old. And I have to say, and this is not necessarily the right way to get growth, but I have to say it did start to grow quite a bit. Part of that was because it was a novelty that they had a young preacher, and all that. But, I don't know. So you're saying, but that did work in your case.
That did work. I don't think it's always the case because I know...
Because you're basically telling all the older guys that we're listening to, it
you're
stinks
done.
For you, but you're done.
Yeah. No, not at all. I tell you what I know that in my experience that works for older pastors who come to a church of about 30, 35 people. Mm-hmm. Longevity is what works. The bad thing is they only stay in these smaller churches until they can get that next slightly bigger church with a slightly bigger paycheck. Yeah. But there is a guy, it's not First Baptist BB, but it was... I can't think of the name of this church in BB, Arkansas, but the pastor had started there. It was just a Baptist church, not the First Baptist church. It was the other Baptist church in town, and the name escapes me. I'm sorry if you're watching, but I guess when he started there, it was about a 75, 80 member church. But after he had been there for like 20 years, and he didn't start till he was in his mid to late 40s, but he's in his 60s now, I think. And after he'd just been there for so long, they're running 600-700.
Yeah, sure, longevity works.
Right.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm kind of saying this tongue in cheek, but you know what my plan is? Because they say now once you're 50 years old or something, you better be wherever you want to be because you're not going to go anywhere else. And I know in other denominations this works different, right? What we're saying is kind of Baptist-centric. But
if you're a Methodist, after 7 to 10 years, they shift you off to another place. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but
here's what my plan is. So if I get old, and
you will get old.
Well, I don't know. The Lord may return in my lifetime. Who knows? But if I get old and I don't have anywhere to go, like Trinity gets rid of me, and I don't have work anymore. I know how this. I've watched this. Every local town, like every local association of churches, particularly Baptist associations, have this one like guru. He's the old guy that just kind of lingers around. And I love those guys because those are the guys that are going to give you the greatest insights. But anyway, here's what happens. Those guys will become interim pastors at a church in the area. And usually they've been an interim pastor at every church in that town because they've all been without a pastor at some point. And get brother so-and-so. Where I was at in McMinnville, that guy was a guy named Phil Dugan. And so Phil Dugan had been interim pastor at every church. Well, guess what? Ultimately, one of those churches will ask you just to be their pastor. Like they wouldn't have otherwise because you're too old, right?
Yeah.
But you get in there and you marry and bury some people and you become a part of you become a fixture.
Yeah.
And you've poured wisdom into all their lives. They want you to be. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to some church and I'm just going to be an interim and that's going to be the end of it. But I'll have a secret plan. And I'll become the pastor, and then I can survive for the rest of my.
Right.
Now I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but frankly, I have seen this take place.
Yeah. Now, the church I went to become a youth pastor after I left Remount Baptist Church was a small church. It was a union church. I think I've probably talked about this on the podcast before for our new listeners. A long time ago in small rural communities, churches used to share multi-denominational churches, and they were called union churches. And when this church had started, it was actually a Presbyterian church, a Methodist church, and a Baptist church. But it stopped being a Presbyterian church many years before I got there because all the Presbyterians died, and so they just never sent another preacher there. Now, I think there was somewhere in the bylaws that, and because it was just Baptist and Methodist, my wife and I did joke that, we could actually join the Presbyterian non-existent church, and then they'd have to send a pastor out there of some kind, or find one, but, we're not Presbyterian. But it was Baptist and Methodist, and there was probably about 15 or so Methodists that were really committed to the church, and about 20 or so Baptists, and there'd be about 35 people. And when my wife and I got there, we brought with us our 3 kids. So that plus 2 other kids on Sunday morning was the youth and children's ministry. Now, on Wednesday nights, the Methodist pastors in these rural areas sometimes have to pastor more than one church. So they preach at one church and then they drive 15 to 20 minutes down the road into another rural community. That's what our Methodist pastor had to do. And on Wednesday nights, they had a group of kids because Methodists are all about, they still do the bus ministry. They still go around and these rural Methodists and they pick up all the unwashed kids or whatever, whether their parents come to church or not. So they would do that for the Wednesday nights. So their church would come to our church for Wednesday night thing because of the same pastor on the Methodist side. And I was the youth pastor. So I got paid 1 week by the Baptists and 1 week by the Methodists. And the reason why they liked me so much is because even though I was a Southern Baptist, which made the Southern Baptists happy at the time, I'm no longer a Southern Baptist, but I was at the time. And I had grown up Methodist, and since I'm fine with Methodism as a part, I don't care what, I can go to a Methodist church and be happy. The infant baptism thing, that's their thing, doesn't bother me, whatever. But I had that background, so I knew all that. I knew what confirmation was. I knew all that stuff. So they hired me, and all I did, really, on Wednesday nights was get a bag of candy, bring it to the church, and I would just give them candy while I gave them, this was by the time I was already in college and all that, and I was giving them the academic lectures, except trying to make them funny, but I was giving them, so we were going through the Gospel of Luke, and I would teach them the Bible, the Gospel of Luke, and then just give them candy. And I would ask them, it works.
Just remember, folks, you asked for this.
Right. And so what I would do is say, okay, you're gonna get candy if you answer a question, because I would always periodically stop and ask them a question. Yeah. I said, if you get it right, I'll hand you the piece of candy. If you get it wrong, I'm going to throw it across the room. You have to get up and get it.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and so sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. But I would just teach the Bible. We were a small church. We did game night like one night a month, but that was it. The rest was just me lecturing and trying to be as entertaining as I can and toss candy.
Have those kids, because it's been a few years, have those kids turned out well? Or do they all have weird, candy addictions?
Well,
and when they read the Bible, they all of a sudden start getting a sweet tooth.
Yeah. I think from the ones I keep up with on Facebook, from what I understand, some of them turned out okay. And my good friend, Jason, he took over after I left that church. He would hang out with us during the Wednesday night service or the Wednesday night youth meeting or whatever. We only did games like once a month, but mostly it was just me teaching and handing out candy. And because there was 2 other churches about within 20 minutes that were both larger than ours. And there was no way
they didn't give out candy.
No, but there was no way we were going to be able to compete with them as far as entertaining the Wednesday night.
Yeah, so you just gave up on
we
that.
We weren't going to have the Xboxes everywhere. We weren't going to have the pizza party every week. We weren't going to have game night with big elaborate games. So we decided to do something different. We're going to be the nerd, the theology nerd thing, and we're going to eat candy.
Well, I'll tell you.
And it worked. It worked. We found
you grew.
Yeah, we found it. We grew to about 40 kids a night from about
that's great
8.
And how many people were in the whole church? The Baptist side of the church?
It was about 20 or so.
Well, wait. Did the Baptist and the Methodist kids come?
Yeah.
Okay. How big was the thing as a whole, both Methodist and Baptist?
Well, the Methodist and the Baptist together was about 35 adults. Okay?
And you had 40 kids?
And we had, our Wednesday night meeting was bigger than both churches combined. But see, the young people at this church, and this is something that my friend Jason has had to constantly deal with, is the young people at this church didn't think Methodist versus Baptist, right? Yeah. They just thought of themselves
as
this is the church, and this is the youth group and stuff. So it became a problem whenever there would be little tensions between the Baptist and Methodist. So that was a weird situation. But what we found is if you can't compete with entertaining kids to death, will be the thing for people who like to read books and nerds or whatever. Of course, I had some football players that came to our church. There was some popular girls that came to our church, and that's always good to help get the popular guys to come to your church.
Yeah, everybody knows that's true, but you're not supposed to say that.
Right, but no, you work with what you got.
It's not spiritual to say that.
I don't care. You work with what the Lord gives you, okay? And you do that. And because they were interested and they liked the candy and their mom was going to make them go anyway, you just use that to your advantage to get the people, and they would say, okay, so this other church, they're going to do all the party and fun on Wednesday nights. But if you just want to sit there and if you're interested in, this really weird guy, which I'm a weird guy, I get it, talking about the Bible and making it fun and interesting to learn, and you ask questions and you can ask, because I was the guy that you could ask anything. When I was in youth group, you couldn't ask anything.
Okay.
I know. I was the guy that you could just ask whatever you want. So they would ask me. Youth group kids ask you all kinds of questions. A lot of them somewhat naughty.
This turned into a lecture. This turned into a podcast on youth ministry.
Well, that's where I got my.
I'll tell you what. I was a youth pastor for a while, but I quit. Now I did not quit because I thought God wanted me to quit. I didn't quit because it was the will of God. Now the Calvinists would say, no, you did. but I didn't quit because it was the will of God. I quit because I couldn't handle, man, all the drama. All the it was like that show Real World. It was like with the girls, they were just particularly girls. I'm sorry, I know we have a few female listeners, but it was these teenage girls, the drama, the things that and if it's important to them, I know it's important and all that. So I said, man, I can't do this. And I went and pastored a church as senior pastor. Yeah. You know what God did to me because of that?
Gave you tons and tons of drama.
It gave me 2 girls. Yeah. There was a time in my life, even the cat was a girl. I had a wife and 2 girls and a cat, and I got a blonde, a redhead, and a brunette. And then a cat, that's you can't run from problems like that. No. But anyway, so let's move on.
Till they become teenagers.
Let's talk a little bit about. Let's talk a little bit about. I don't want to think about it too much right now. Let's go ahead. Actually, that's a good thing. Put in the comments section. I'm going to make comments for this, and put in the comments section advice for Braxton on raising girls.
Yeah.
So, and if you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next podcast. How's that? But. Let's talk a little bit about actually being senior pastor of a church. Now,
that was my next step.
Okay, well we'll alternate here. Let me talk.
Yeah, but they don't want to hear from you.
You're right. You know what? Go ahead.
I'm just kidding. I've been running my mouth. I do get excited about youth ministry though. Youth ministry is dying in this country.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a movement that I think is dumb.
Right.
And go ahead and comment about this too. I don't care.
Yeah, it's dying. I know what you're going to say, so I'll go ahead and say it because they want to hear from me anyway.
Man.
Okay. God. So 2 reasons why it's dying. One is because the big loud youth ministry.
Let's over here and play with Optimus Prime.
There you go. The big loud ministry is not doing anything to retain the young people, and empty and whatever. But the other thing, which I think I agree with you, that I know what you were going to say, is the idea of doing away with youth ministry, with kids ministry, and doing this all. Is that what you're talking about? This idea of not having any ministries that are age specific.
Oh, I get to talk now?
Getting rid of demographic
You're asking
ministries.
me a question?
Yeah, is that what you were saying?
What I was thinking of
you weren't even paying attention.
is what is called the family church movement.
Yes, where they
that
get away
says,
with
yes, no, we're not doing anything age or gender specific or whatever. It's
which
just,
is what I said when he wasn't listening.
Yeah, no, I listened. I heard you. Where it's just all together. You all do together, and you're not doing any of no candy being thrown at anybody. Like that's still, and we're not doing 1 month a week game night. That's
Adults
still,
like candy, by the way.
Month.
Wednesday night Bible study. Try this thing with your adult ministry. It'll work.
Be careful if they're diabetics. Keep some diabetic candy around.
Right.
But yeah. I think youth ministry. Listen, youth ministry for me was great because I looked forward. I'm sorry, kids are carnal a lot of the time, and they're not thinking the same things as you are about going to church. Right. They're thinking, I get to see my friends. Well, they shouldn't just be thinking about seeing their friends, but there's something to say for fellowship, even at that age. And where do you want your kids to meet their spouse? Where do you want your kids to find their friends? I want them to find them behind the doors of the church. I don't know what they got at the school system. I don't know what they get from the pagan kids down the street,
right.
But I know what they're getting at church. So I'm all for youth ministry. If that's not your deal, do whatever God wants you to do. But hey, if you're a Calvinist, guess what? I'm doing the will of God one way or the other. So, but I don't know. I'm a little sassy today. I think you're bringing it out of me.
Yeah.
But I went, when I went to pastor my first church, it was in Jacksonville, Florida, and it was a church that was on the side of town that was not considered the good side of town, but used to be 4 decades ago, where all the rich white people lived, Yeah. And then that side of town kind of began to change, but the church did not change with it. And the church still just would only make comfortable the rich white people, or at least the white people. And if black people came to church there, or any other minority, I guess, they would say to them, now I'm not making this up. I'm telling you, this is my experience. I've got people here in my life that can testify to this, that would say, you know what, we're glad you want to go to church. So a black person comes in, they say, we're glad you want to worship God, but there's a nice black church down the road for you to worship God. That's the church for you. Can you imagine?
Yes, I grew up in Arkansas.
I know, but like I've experienced it, so I know it's real, but still it blows my mind to think about it. I can't ever get used to it. It's unbelievable. So, you know what I did when I went there? I was interested in church growth, by the way. I did not want our church to remain small if I could help it. But do you know what I wanted to do to change it? Evangelism. I wanted to reach people for Jesus. So I knocked on every door in our neighborhood. I did everything I could. We had special event days. And we had certain members who would say things like, we don't want... we should have never brought you here because you're bringing all that. This is what they say, all that trash into our church. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? So
yes, I can.
I know you can imagine. I can too.
Arkansas.
I lived it, man. But I'm just telling you, it's horrific.
Yeah.
So you know what we did?
What?
We had African American Day at our church, and we found a guy in the community who was like an African American pastor, but he didn't have a church at the moment, but he had like a little following that wherever he was going, they'd go there, and they needed somewhere to worship before he launched out and tried to start a church or whatever he was going to do. So we said, you're our associate pastor now, and we sat him up on the stage, like I hadn't normally sat on the stage. But now I was, because I wanted to sit up there with him, elevated high above the white people who were racist. All right, and I'm not naming any particular people. Not all of them were. It's a small minority. But I'm just saying. So he was up there, and we had African American Day, and we invited a black church to come be a part of it, and we brought a well-known African American lady singer that everybody in the area knew to come sing. And I preached, but I really brought it, man. Yeah. And you know what? It was one of the biggest days ever. And our church ultimately grew from 15 people all over the age of 65 to about 100. It was about 100 people. And so that was my experience. It was not pleasant. And here's the thing. My wife had only, we talked about this on another podcast, but then we ditched that podcast because we didn't think it turned out well. Right. But this part of it was good. My wife had only been a Christian for a short time and had never obviously been a pastor's wife. And 3 months after we get married, she's thrust into this caricature, really is what it was,
right,
of what everybody says about church today or about Baptist churches. Yeah. And she experienced all of it. And I got to say, though, we had a lot of people saved. We saw a lot of people saved. We saw some great things happen, but also some of the most disappointing things from people that really ought to have known better. Yeah. And then after that, I went to the second church I pastored where it was just really a blessing, a miraculous, just incredible outpouring of God. And I did all the same things there. It's just that those people were more willing to follow God's leadership, right, and all that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, the beauty about small church ministry. Now, I got voted in when I became a
I can't
pastor.
Wait for you to tell them this story.
I got voted
this
in
is great.
By 13 people, 13 to nothing. It was a unanimous vote. That was every person that attended that church, even on Sunday mornings. 7 months later...
What did you preach on?
I managed to get...
Trial sermon was...
Oh, Jude, 1 through 4.
Like the whole book?
No, I just preached Jude 1 through 4 and said, if you want,
Were you into apologetics yet?
Yeah,
so that's why
Biola, yeah.
Earnestly contend for the faith.
And I was already in Biola at that point.
Yeah, okay.
And so it was like, okay, if you want to hear the rest of it, you'll have to hire me.
There's a teaser.
Yeah. Because, man, you make that one knockout, and then, it doesn't matter if it goes downhill after they vote you in, right? So,
wait, what?
See if I can get that.
Now I know why what happened next.
Right. No, I finished Jude, and I was able to make it through with James and 1 Peter before I got voted out. But, so I had these 13 people. About half of them were Christians, at least. I mean, they're probably all saved, but I mean, when you think about, are they Christian? Not are they Christians, but I mean, are they
living Christianly?
Are they living Christianly? There was only about half of them, and so I went around and I figured out that what had happened in this church was that there was a split sometime in the past, and there was more people who hated the people that were still there. Not there, that used to be there, that still love the church but won't go because of these people that I'm pastoring, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I quickly found out because I went through the members roll, and these people were still technically members, or at least nobody had ever taken their name off or transferred their membership or whatever. So I visited all of these people. I got a few of them to come back, but after I realized trying to get those people to come back and worship with the people that were still going, and the more I got to know the people that were still going, the more I understood why they stopped going. I said, okay, fine. I'll just have to go get people who are, I can't get the old members back. These members that are members, and I know what people are saying. Love the church you have, not the church you want, and I do believe that. And I did love those people. I didn't like them, but I loved them. But I went to go out to get.
The people that you both loved and liked.
Well, the lost people.
Yeah.
Who I liked, yes, and loved because I wanted them to, be saved. And so a few months in, it went from like 13 to we're running about between 50 and 60 on average,
Amen.
within a few short months.
That's serious growth.
Yeah, and people are getting saved. Some of these people never donned, the doorstep of a church. And there was a small group of people that told me this is what they wanted, who didn't like...
Well, yeah, because they kind of have to say that.
Right. They always say, we want to grow, we want to do this, we want to do that, and then when it happens, they frown on it.
You know when it happens?
What?
The day you had 14 new people show up, and you could outvote them if there was a vote. Yeah,
but see, none of these people knew how Baptist churches worked. Right, because they weren't church people.
But those original people, they knew.
Yeah, and they kept coming, and we said, the bylaws were a mess, and I said we need to form a church covenant, we need to form a mission statement, we need to work out our bylaws and stuff. So we're seeing things change. We need to become a church again. This was basically a replant almost. So all these new people are coming, the trash, as you call it. I mean, just rednecks.
Well, no, I don't think they're trash.
Well, I don't think they're trash either, but that's what they would call them.
I'm just going to let you talk, and I'm going to play with C-3PO and Mickey Mouse.
And so what had happened is when you do get growth in a church like that, you got to make sure you're with people who want it. Because what had happened is when I went to go do my residency one summer, I came back and found out that they had a secret business meeting and voted me out. 6 people to 5.
They didn't tell you that it was going to happen?
No.
That they were having a vote?
No. I had my buddy preaching.
Had it been scheduled?
Well, according to what the bylaws I had, they had to give my residency was 2 weeks and put notice, to the members.
Did they follow the bylaws?
Yeah,
but they have to notify all the members, right?
Yeah, but at that point, there's still only 13 or so members because all the people were coming hadn't joined, even though I'd try to get them joined. They were just coming.
Oh, man.
Yeah, as we built up. So I get voted out. My wife and I are told that the reasons we're voted out is, one, I didn't let the VBS be done with the heretic church down the road. So no, we're not doing that. They're heretics. Yeah, but they're our cousins. Well, they're still heretics. Your cousins need to repent and believe the gospel. I didn't let an unmarried couple join unless they got married. That didn't go over well.
I would think they'd be all about that.
No. They said, just let them join the church because that's what they want to do, and then maybe we'll get them married later,
Okay.
And I was like, well, that's not how it works.
Yeah, you have to repent.
Right. Yeah. They're just fornicating. And then they said that I didn't give big enough hugs. They didn't think that I was loving enough because I didn't give. Yeah, go ask my wife, Misty. That's one of the things that they
Was it a woman
about.
that said that?
Yes.
Oh, that explains it.
Yeah.
Not because women are awful, but because this particular woman had the hots for Jonathan Pritchett.
Well, she was about 30 years older than me, but no,
Yeah,
it was I didn't give big enough hugs.
Fits perfectly.
Like I don't give other women who I'm not married to big full body hugs. I'll give you a side hug or something, But I'm not gonna. And so
the side hug. That's how it works.
Right.
That's what you do.
You don't get all up.
No.
But I didn't give big enough hugs. My wife was back there doing the kids ministry.
So.
Right. But
is it because she was a woman in a position of some kind of authority? Is that what?
Some of the, we had the 2 little ones, so her and my oldest son Zach, and then Noah and Sarah would be back there, and then about 7 or 8 other small kids. And so who was going to do it? Well, the preacher's wife does it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so my wife's back there doing
especially if she can't play the piano, because that's what the preacher's wife's supposed to do: sing in the choir, play the piano.
Right.
If you can't do either one of those 2 things, you better be handling the kids.
Now, when I was in my residency, Misty hadn't gone with me.
What do you mean residency?
I had to go to the land of
California. You mean Biola?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was ridiculous. I'm glad that our seminary doesn't require people to be away from their family for 2 weeks, spend a lot of money to stay in the godforsaken land like California. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm gone. So my wife, they complained about her, which is when I lost it, probably said some words that you shouldn't say in a church building once they told, after they moved on from their complaints about me.
You shouldn't say them anywhere. What does the 4 walls of the church have to do with it?
Well, there's sacred space. But once they brought up my wife, and here's what they said about my wife. They said that my wife, while I was gone, because I wasn't there, after the kids got picked up, my wife would just take her kids and go home. But while I was gone, my wife was not the last person to leave the church building. So I blew my top at them and was glad to have been fired and said that I hope the Lord puts out their candle.
You wanted him to write Ichabod over the door of the church?
So, but hey, you get out there, you get in the neighborhood, you invite people to church, and a small church will grow. You just don't end up in the situation I had where people say, we don't want that.
If you're in that kind of church, it works out if you encourage them to be members, right?
Right. That's the one regret that I made, was I didn't really push church membership yet. But these were new. Some of them were new believers. Some of them were just attenders just because I harangued them to come. But small churches can grow. Small churches can have big ministries, in small places. You can get out there in the community and be loving and break every stereotype that people think of churches. And the great thing about small church ministry is you've got nothing to lose, and no, seriously, let's be honest here. You've got nothing to lose, and you have the flexibility enough where you're not stuck in a rut to where you can try so many different things, throw as many darts against the wall and see what sticks.
Okay, all right, so we're back to me now. Let me tell you, this will probably be here's the benefit, I think, of this podcast so far.
There is none.
No, there is. Because there's some pastor out there who's at a church that's running 35 or 40, and he's about to jump out the window, which will be a ground level window, and it'll just break his ankle. So now his situation is worse, and he's going to listen to this, and it's going to encourage him to commiserate. Misery loves company. But here's something practical. Okay, so I'm confident, Dr. Pritchett, that if you had gone to the right kind of church that was cooperative with you, that you would have seen growth. Okay.
We saw.
Well, I know that it would have continued, right? But I did get that.
I'm fun. People.
I went to a church in McMinnville, Tennessee, is my second church, and please don't when I say my church, I know it's not my church, it's God's church. People will say that kind of stuff. Yeah, I know. Anyway, or my ministry, your ministry, it's your ministry, right? It's not. I know. Okay, right. But anyway. The kind of people that might listen to this podcast are the kind of people that might say those things,
right? And it's stupid,
But here's the thing. So I went to that church, and they were running a little over 200. Is that considered a small church? I know Lifeway considers that a small church.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because we look at that kind of data, I would say 200 or less. I think what's his name, Stetzer guy, whatever. Ed Stetzer. He's. Or maybe it was Tom Rayner, or somebody put out something.
Tom Rayner's site had something like less than 300 is a small church.
Right.
300 to whatever is a medium-sized church. And then he created a new category of not mega church, but I don't know. There's something else, like really big church. I don't know, something like that.
I think 200 people's big church. But.
Yeah, but anyway. And the large, but not mega, goes up to like 1,700 or something. Right. I don't know what it is. But anyway, so I went to this church. It had about 225, I think, in worship. I don't know what Sunday school was. And the auditorium seated about 300. And I went there, and you're going to play with C3PO now?
Yeah, you're talking.
Do you want to play with Donatello? I've got Donatello.
Yeah, all right.
And that's Donatello in a detective outfit.
Well, it's better than nodding.
Release.
Yeah, I mean, I guess playing with toys is better than nodding off while you're talking.
And that's original, man. That Donatello, that's original from the 80s. That was my toy.
Oh, okay.
How about that? Anyway, but I went to the, when you get done, display them there. But I went to this church in McMinnville, Tennessee, small church, and I don't think it was a small church. Anyway, 225. And there was a novelty to my being a young pastor. Now, this is going to be practical. There was a novelty to my being a young pastor with an attractive wife. We didn't have any kids yet, which is, there were some people that kind of acted like we didn't know what the world was about because we didn't have kids, and it turns out they were right. But but we went there, and you know what I did? I did the same thing I'd done at the church in Florida. I began knocking on doors, and guess what? I don't care what anybody says.
Oh, that sounds like a Mormon.
I can witness. Yeah, I don't care. I could knock on doors in this neighborhood right now, and I have done, and we'll see people get saved and start attending church.
Yeah.
Not every one of them that claims to have gotten saved will follow through, and okay, maybe they're a false convert, but some of them will. So I don't know. Anyway, I started doing that. I started doing all the things. I started calling and writing to every member of the church. And no matter how big your church is, you should start doing that. A handwritten letter or something. or visiting them personally and just start working through. But anyway, I did that. I started visiting. I did all the evangelistic stuff. And we started to grow. I remember it wasn't like 3 or 4 months. And some of those people watch this podcast. They know they know. They can attest to this. But we started to grow so much that our auditorium that sat about 300 became so cramped in such a short period of time that we started talking about going to 2 services. So we went to 2 services. And then before you know it, in about a year's time since I got there, the 2 services were comfortably full. That we were getting to that 80% rule, like once you get 80%, you guys know that's my phone. That's my phone. Don't check your phone. Sorry, I'm not going to edit that out. But I will turn that volume off now. Yeah. But
the
I think
production values continue.
Well, it's okay. I think the content is good here.
Yeah, at least you're not running to turn the lights on this time.
Oh, they don't care. Yeah. They like that stuff. They know us. But the way that it worked, and this is not me being so innovative. This is just me being evangelistic and being strategic in my evangelism like I was raised to do. And so here's what we did. And let me tell you something. All right, now, Dr. Pritchett, if they don't like this, it's just because they're ignorant.
I agree.
This is not me. This is Dr. Harold Hunter taught me this, and I'm excited about it because this is the church growth strategy. Now, we teach some church growth stuff here, and frankly, I think a lot of church growth stuff is, if revival breaks out in a church, that church will grow, right? But this strategy I'm about to share with you will not ever be sold at Lifeway as its own standalone thing because it's too simple. Most books have 3 good points and then the rest is filler because we have to find a way to market that, and they would never be able to fill out the rest of this book because here's the key that we did. Number 1, I had articles. I had a space that we bought in the paper that was sermon in miniature. Now, this may be outdated now. I don't know. Frankly, I don't think it is because there's a lot of people that still do read the local paper. Take out a space in the paper and give a little sermonette type thing, a little brief sermon or synopsis of your sermon for the next coming Sunday. And then also tell the local radio and maybe TV, the local stuff, tell them if you ever want a voice, if you ever want someone to give you a soundbite, or to say something from a Christian perspective about something going on in the world, whether it's politics, war, whatever it is, I'll be your guy, okay? What happens is you start becoming the community pastor. People think of that guy as the pastor in our town.
Right.
Because he's the guy whose face I always see. He's the guy. But here's the thing, ultimately. Once a month, or if you don't feel comfortable with this, once every 2 months. I never went longer than once every 2 months. What I would do is I would on that week of the month, I would push for it and I would say, okay, now on this particular date, we're going to have a special event day at our church. Now, I know churches do special event days all the time. They're doing it wrong. Here's how you do it. On this particular day, whatever you call it, maybe it's Valentine's Day and you do it something related to, I don't know, Black History Month or Valentine's Day or whatever you do, whatever, temporally significant thing you do. But you theme it whatever. But your focus is going to be evangelism. Now, you ought to be doing evangelism outside the church because I know there are going to be people who say, well, the church is for training people and then they're supposed to go out into the world and reach people. Fine. But if there's unbelievers in the church, that's a good time to reach them because it's always a good time to reach unbelievers.
So would you have, like in July or Memorial Day, would you actually have, or Veterans Day, would you do Patriot theme? Because that's like frowned upon these days.
I
patriotic services.
Yeah, I did it, and I'll tell you why. Because I think some of the things that young preachers split churches over is stupid. So if I know that 3/4 of my church wants a certain thing because it's that certain time, okay, fine, do it. Don't upset people unnecessarily over it. That's one of the biggest problems, I think, with guys our age and younger, is they go into these churches
and think everything's wrong with it.
And they want to cause a big stir over some of the most ridiculous things in the world. There are some hills worth dying on, but not every hill is worth dying on.
Yeah. God loves America.
But I might not do my special event day on that same day as that thing.
Yeah.
But I'll do my special event day. Now, here's how this works. You get up and you preach your most evangelistic sermon that you've got. Your goal is to see people saved, and you preach it like that's the last sermon you ever get to preach.
Amen.
You ought to preach every sermon that way, as far as I'm concerned. But I'd preach that sermon.
Yeah, but not every sermon's evangelistic.
Right, but I do think every sermon you preach, you ought to think, what if this is the last sermon I ever preached?
Right.
But I preach that thing, and I would want to nail it to the wall, and my goal would be to see people saved. Now, I was always evangelistic, even when it wasn't this time, but I might be preaching on issues where my main goal is not evangelism. But on that day, it was. And I would tell and since you're doing that once every month or once every 2 months, you can tell your people, you can say, look, I don't ask a lot out of you, but on this particular day, here's all I'm asking you to do. I just want you to find someone who's not a believer or someone who is not regularly attending church, and I want you to do your best to get them to the church on that day. Now the criticism of this is, well, okay, but they should be reaching them themselves. Yes, they should, and I want them to do that. But on top of doing that, get them to church, right? So
Right.
I'll do it. And then I'd preach that day, and guess what? We always, or maybe not always, but most of the time we had a number of people who make some kind of decision for the Lord for the first time. They've prayed to receive Christ, they've repented and placed their faith in Christ. Okay. Oh, but there's going to be all these false converts. Okay, yeah, there might be. But you know what? There's also going to be some true converts.
Right.
And you know what? A number of those true converts won't stick, but a number of them will. Now, when I say they don't stick, they might go to some other church.
Right.
But some of them will stick at your church. Now, this kind of growth that is based on evangelism is not as fast as getting the hotshot band and doing the coffee and donuts in the pew like you got a coffee dispenser on the back of the pew, man. Hey, I've got a business plan for you. I never thought of that. But the thing is, right. It may not be as fast as that, but it's more healthy because you're reaching people that they became Christians at your church. They don't care what the music is so much as they care that you led them to the Lord.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I know why you're saying the false converts thing, because we live in a culture where evangelicals are so scared to be evangelistic because somebody might not be a real convert if you do evangelism. Who cares?
Well, I mean, we should care that they're false converts, but that shouldn't stop you from the method.
Who cares that might happen? That doesn't mean don't do it, because that's always the net effect. They come up with excuses to not be evangelistic, and that leads to no evangelism because they're worried about, well, I might make a false convert. No, and when I say who cares if you might make a false convert when you will also get converts? It's better to be evangelistic than not evangelistic. And
yeah, because you know what? I got the proof in the pudding, man. By the time I left that church, we had well over 500 in worship, and on some really good big days, we had over 600.
Yeah.
Now, I was 25 years old at the time. Can you imagine, I didn't, it's not because I'm so great. You don't have to be a great preacher for this to work. You just got to do, and see, that's the system. So when people say, how do I grow, how should I grow this church? What's the secret? It's kind of like when people ask me, because right now I don't mean to brag, but I am in the bit of a little bit of weight loss here, right? And I've lost at present about 30 pounds, 29 pounds, okay? And people ask me, well, how do you do that? What's the secret? Eat less and work out more. That's that's the secret, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with this. What's the secret? It's like people want you to put a DVD from Lifeway in the DVD player and instantly the church will grow. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, but it was a $150 DVD thing that I bought. Well, I'm sorry you wasted $150. Yeah. Here's the secret. Reach people for Jesus. Yes. That's the secret.
Go knock on doors. Go
and then disciple those people once they get saved and train them. And if you train them right and they really got saved and they really are submitting and they're under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, guess what happens next? They start reaching other people too.
Yeah, and I want to, for people who want to become pastors, it never fails that most of the time, unless you're coming up in a megachurch system that recruited you from within, you're probably going to go to one of these smaller churches when you first start out. My advice to you, if you think you're called to the ministry and you're still in seminary or whatever, start writing your sermons now.
Yeah.
Write your sermons now. Have a good stock of sermons so that you're not having to spend all your time listening to what they told you in seminary, that you need to spend your time in your office, in your study. preparing sermons and poring over the word. Yeah, you should read the Bible and stuff, but you need to have sermons on hand so that you can hit the ground running and be out there doing evangelism and church growth stuff, and not sitting there in your new office that's probably not even all that nice, depending on the church you end up in. Get your sermons now. Start working on that part of it now, so that by the time you get into your next church, because especially older pastors know this, they're going to go back to the well, and I know Dr. Elliott hates that thing where you go back to previous sermons that have always, fresh word. All these preaching professors come up with all this stuff to justify staying in an office all day. But I'm kidding, pastors.
No, I don't. You looked at me and you saw that I didn't affirm you, and you thought, "Oh, I upset Braxton." No, I agree. And you know what? Some of my best sermons are the first ones I wrote.
Right.
I'll tell you, when I go do a revival somewhere, because I still do old-fashioned revivals on top of the apologetics conferences, and when I go do a revival, when I know the one that I know is the one that is likely to make the biggest impact, is, get this, folks, the first sermon I wrote, almost completely untouched, and I wrote it when I was 16 years old.
Well, amen.
And it's still it's a little bit sad. Because I'll
write
a new sermon now, and it's what? It's this one doesn't. There are some I've written lately that have been like that, but really there's nothing wrong with stockpiling sermons, like you say,
and hit the ground running, and especially because I think the pastors who get into these new places, they do go back to sermons they've previously preached, so that they can, the ones that are effective, can get out of the office and do exactly what you're talking about. Knocking on doors, that old-fashioned stuff, just straight evangelism. And so that's what's going to work.
My wife made cookies and stuff, and we'd put them in a thing and take them to new visitors too.
Yeah. So there's hope.
There's all kind of things you can do.
Your church may never get bigger than 200 people just because of your location, but I think if you put in the effort, any small quote-unquote church can still have a big ministry.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will say that is a little bit sad is there's a last category. I know we're at an hour now, but just hang with us, because there's a last category here. And that is churches that, I don't care what anybody says, are in a certain kind of a situation where, I'm not saying they can't grow, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And there are churches like that. Let me tell this. So at some point, before I started going to my father's church that he started here, I was attending a church called Center of Hope Church in Evansville, Indiana.
Right there.
Yeah, we can see it. We've mentioned it in several podcasts. I was interim pastor there for a little while, for about a year, and we did grow a little bit when I was interim pastor there. But it's a different kind of a church, and the pastors before me and the people that are doing it now, they're running into this same deal. What it is, it's kind of like the church that I first was at. Not in terms of the people giving a hard time about race and stuff like that, although it used to be that kind of a church. Those people are gone, and this is now a church plant. But this church is made up of a group that came from one big church in Evansville, and then another church near Evansville to serve as the kind of support group for the church plant. So you had about 30 from one church, 30 from another. And then the rest, a lot of the other people are people from the Evansville Rescue Mission. Yeah. And in order to stay at the I'm not sure, I may have this wrong, but I think it used to be, in order to stay at the Evansville Rescue Mission, they had to come to church at Center of Hope, not just any church, at this church. So what you have there is you have some people that are really interested in the church plant because they came here for that purpose. And then you have these people that are dealing with homelessness and all that. And those people are all in one place together. Well, besides your core group that's helped start it, these people from the rescue mission are transient people who they may get saved at your church and be there for a couple of weeks, but then they're on the Greyhound to California somewhere looking for work or something. So it's just near impossible to grow that church numerically in terms of growth. But is that church doing a good thing? Yes. They're seeing. I could get up there and sing Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I'm going to have a bunch of people at the altar repenting and placing their faith in Christ and save folks getting right with God about things. And the church is feeding these people that every Sunday they do a meal, not on Wednesday, on Sunday morning, after church, lunch for anybody that comes. It's free. You don't have to pay, anybody and everybody. And that church is doing amazing things. They got an incredible food pantry. I know a lot of churches have food pantries and clothing banks, but this church has a system that is unbelievable for making sure that it's not taken advantage of and all that. And it's just doing an incredible job. So that church may never grow numerically to be a mega church. It may, I hope it does, but it's not so much a church in the typical use of that word in our land. It's a preaching station, and it's a missions station. And that may be what your church is. Where my dad is pastoring right now, because of various reasons that we don't have time to go into, that church may never become a mega church. But you know what? We've had 2 young men surrender to preach that are going to impact the world greatly, and we've had a lot of people saved. It's a different kind of ministry. And there are churches like that. There are ministries like that. And if your church doesn't grow numerically, it doesn't mean you're not seeing people saved. It doesn't mean you're not being evangelistic, like Dr. Pritchett said at the start of the show. And it doesn't mean that what you're doing is you're doing something wrong. It could well be that God's just got a different plan for what your ministry is. Now, that should not be an excuse for some people who have grown cold in the work, or who aren't trying like they should, or who are rationalizing. Because for most churches, there is a way to grow, and that way may not be fast growth, but it's through getting out there and reaching people for Jesus, and doing it by rolling up your sleeves and putting some muscle into it for the kingdom.
Amen.
If you want to learn more about church ministry, and you're at a small church or a mega church or you're a missionary, or you're a lay church minister, or whatever you are, if you're a believer, we want you to become, that's my computer, don't freak out. We want you to become a student at Trinity. You can learn casually at Trinity by auditing classes and all that. It doesn't cost you much, and you can get all of the learning right there. If you do want to get that degree, we have certificate programs and degree programs all the way up to the doctoral level, and you can learn formally that way, and you're not going to find a more reasonable cost for the quality of education that you're getting here. And we want you to come be a part of that.
And you won't have to fly here for 2 weeks and leave your ministry.
And you're not going to learn from some guy.
And get fired while you're gone.
You're not going to learn from somebody with no experience who just got a degree in this stuff. You're going to learn from people who have worked in small church ministry, who have been pastors of mega churches. Yeah. We have some of those. Some who have been multi-site pastors. We're going to have some. Maybe by the time this podcast is out, we got one guy who's teaching a class on that, who's a multi-site pastor, because we do have multi-site students. Hey, listen, we want you to come and know that you're going to be learning from people who are experts in the field. One of the best things at graduation every year, Dr. Pritchett, is hearing from people who say, I realized very early on in my Trinity experience that these people were experts in their field.
Yes.
And you can feel good about that and know that. And we want you to come. Visit us at trinitysim.edu. Visit us, write to us using the email here on the show if you want, at Trinity Radio at trinitysim.edu. Now, if you really do just want to kind of get your feet wet in this stuff and learn some more apologetics type stuff, the worldview kind of things that we normally talk about on the show, go visit braxtonhunter.com, and you can get videos, audio, lectures, sermons, blog articles, whatever you want, it's there. And I'd love for you to visit my site. But I don't get paid anything for you visiting my site. I'm not trying to steer you there for my own benefit. I'd much rather you visit Trinity Sim and become a student.
Amen.
So,
but his website's pretty cool. Plus, you'll find some stuff from me on there, so it's fine.
I'm going to go back to playing with Donatello.
Okay,
as we close
and also
the show.
Be sure to stick around this channel for the Trinity team with Sarah Hicks and Adam Roth.
Actually, it's not on this channel.
Oh, is it
it's not on this channel. That's on, and that's another thing. Please subscribe. No. Please subscribe to this channel by going to clicking on subscribe if you're watching this video. If it's embedded somewhere, click through to YouTube and click subscribe. Give us the thumbs up. That's really appreciated. And the Trinity team with Adam Roth and Sarah Hicks is on Trinity Seminary's official YouTube channel. So search trinitysim.edu on YouTube and you'll find that, or just go to Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. Well, I'll just put it in the description for this show.
Okay.
All right.
I didn't know what YouTube channel.
This was your show, man. Yeah. What do you want to say to close it out?
I want to say, I want to say to all the small church pastors out there, don't listen to the blogosphere that says you're not getting it done. Don't let the people in your church listen to the blogosphere that says they don't love Jesus enough. They don't get out and do evangelism enough. They don't have a heart for missions enough. They're not giving enough of their money to the denomination or whatever. Keep doing your thing. Serve the Lord. Love God. Love your neighbor. And I think, stay after it. You're doing the Lord's work and God sees you. That's what I want to say.
Because small churches are often more than meets the eye.
Amen.